G'day. Now, it's been a few days since I last made an update, and I've been working on a few scripts and a few projects that I'd like to do for videos in the future, but none of them are quite ready yet, and I'm not going to have time tomorrow to make a video, so I thought I'll just try and make one off the top of my head. And a subject that occurred to me is that the other day, I was having an argument, someone was wrong on the internet, and I got an insult thrown at me that I was neurotic, that I was sounding neurotic. And it's insults are always like these interesting things. Like a person, when they insult you, it's an intimidation tactic because, we call them fighting words. So when someone insults you, what they're kind of saying is like, I don't like you, and it's kind of a threat. There's a threat implied with the insult. And therefore, if you want to start something, I'll fight you. It might be physical, it might be social, verbal, like exposing secrets, embarrassing or shaming you, kind of thing like that. And the whole purpose is trying to intimidate you into backing down. And this is, of course, this is not an argument, and this is why we call it ad hominem. It's against the person who's speaking, giving the argument. If you're a person who values truth and rationality, then insults are just a huge waste of time, and they're silly, they're meaningless, and they don't make any sense. But we're not entirely rational creatures. We do compete with each other, and so it makes sense that we have these things where we jostle with each other to assert dominance. But the thing with an insult, though, is like, well, we have the internet now, so the person couldn't physically intimidate me, so they would throw an insult, and that's supposed to hit my reptilian mind and go, oh, this person doesn't like me, they might get upset with me, so maybe I should back down and just let them win the argument and let them have the podium and self-censor myself. But why would I do that online? They can't physically threaten me. So the insult is just like, it's a silly thing. But the other thing is that with an insult, for it to be effective, you actually need to hit somewhere in a person where they're vulnerable. And the funny thing is when this guy called me neurotic, in his mind, neurotic is an insult. It's bad to be neurotic, especially if you're a male. Because apparently it's okay for women to be neurotic, but if you're a man and someone calls you neurotic, that's meant to be a biting attack on your manhood. Now, the interesting thing is that it didn't bother me at all. I don't consider being neurotic to be an insult, and it's not like, I'm kind of, neurotic. I should probably expand that a bit more. So neurotic is one of the big 5 personality ones. Jordan Peterson talks about this all the time. He's got a personality test, a big 5 personality test, and another name for that is OCEAN: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Now, neuroticism is the trait that tends to get negative connotations, and even the sound of it, neuroticism. It sounds like something bad. And neuroticism is the tendency to focus on negative emotions like fear and sadness and anger, and just dwell on them, dwelling those negative feelings. They tend to last longer. They've got longer latency. And interesting thing is, like, there's a sex difference. Like, men report having a lower level of neuroticism on average than women. Women have like a standard deviation higher. And it's all debatable. Like, are men really less neurotic than women, or is it because men are perceived to be lesser men? Like, their manhood is challenged if you say they're neurotic, because that's associated with it as a feminine trait. And so are men self-reporting when they do the Big 5 personality test to say they've got less neuroticism than what they actually have? And it wouldn't surprise me if there was a part of that. Now, I did the test and I got really high up for neuroticism, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm okay with that. And a lot of other people who did the test, they got high in neuroticism. They're like, oh no, oh my god, there's something wrong with me. I've got this character flaw that I'm neurotic. And I found that really fascinating, because I thought about it and like, well, yeah, okay, I got a really high score in neuroticism, and I'm okay with that, which is a bit of a contradiction. It seems like a bit of a contradiction. The reason why I'm okay with that is that these big five personality traits are, in evolutionary biological terms, they say they're conserved by nature, meaning that they keep coming up over and over again. They don't disappear. They don't get selected out through natural selection. They're continuously apparent in the population. And what that means is that they must be valuable for survival. Because if they weren't valuable for survival, you'd lose them. And if they're a detriment, you'd lose them very fast. But the fact that these big five personality traits seem to be persistent, and I mean, there's no accepted scientific study on this, but if you spent time with pets or cattle, animals, any kind of animal, wildlife, a zoo and stuff like that, spend time with animals, you kind of realize that you can figure out what their big five personality type is. Like anyone can look at a Chihuahua and go, wow, the Chihuahua's got a lot of neuroticism. And anyone can look at a Labrador and go, wow, the Labrador's got a lot of extroversion. And you can say a kitten has a high level of openness, curiosity killed the cat, whereas older cats have lower levels of openness. So you can easily figure out all the animals in the animal kingdom, where they fit in the big five. So it's not just a human trait. And again, you'll have no scientist will ever stake their reputation on that, because scientists don't like talking about feelings in animals. They're kind of the worst topics to ever talk about, because you're just anthropomorphizing. Anyway, that's another issue. Scientists like to take themselves very seriously. But the thing is, like, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, these basic big five personality traits, it wouldn't surprise me if dinosaurs had them. It would make sense if they did, because these traits are so useful for survival. And what's really fascinating to me about the big five is that both extremes of the five traits are useful for survival in strange ways. Like with openness, if you have high openness, you've got an inquiry mind, you're interested in new things, so that can help you survive, because you might find a new food source, a new habitat, a new place to live, a dwelling. So openness there can open up all these possibilities for you that will improve your chances of survival. But at the same time, openness can get you into trouble, and having less openness will help you. So less openness will prevent you from getting eaten by a predator because you wandered too far and it wasn't safe for you to be that far away from your habitat, your native home, where you live, wherever your nest is, whatever animal you are. And so animals that aren't open to new experiences might have a survival advantage, and we might see that with the adult cat. Now, kittens are safe because they've got a mother cat watching over them to keep them safe when they're exploring, but when the cat's older and they're on their own, it's not safe for them to be curious anymore. And so their openness decreases. And so cats have kind of figured out how to have the best of both worlds. They've figured out, you'll be open-minded when you're young, and you'll be quite fixed and set in your ways when you're older. Just to get the benefit of both. Now, this applies to all of them. And this is it's absolutely fascinating to me, because it's like, if one of these traits was always useful, there would never be a deficit. You'd just always have the extreme, either a lot of it or very little of it. But the fact that we have this bell curve, this distribution of these five traits across the population, says that there's no one trait that's better than the others. Otherwise, you wouldn't get there. Now, people kind of say, but what about conscientiousness? The more conscientiousness you have, the better. Well, not necessarily, because people who are high in conscientiousness, they never stop moving. They're very industrious. They're constantly doing something, constantly working. Now, in a state of nature, you can't always be sure where your food supply is, particularly if you're a carnivore. So you might have noticed that with cats and dogs, they sleep for about 2/3 of the day. And that's because they can't tell when they're going to get food, so they need to save energy. So they're very low conscientiousness. And what that means is that they're much more likely to survive than if they were constantly out and about for 16, 18 hours a day like people are, they would burn up too many calories, they wouldn't be able to support it with their diet, and they would die. Or they would overeat from their environment and they'd kill off all the prey, and then they'd have nothing to eat, there'd be ecological collapse. And so, in a funny way, being lazy is actually a survival advantage. And humans have only started to become very industrious and conscientiousness recently because we've got abundant food. But as soon as there's a shortage in the food supply, the lazy people are actually more likely to survive because they're not going to be burning through as many calories. And yet you can look at this with all of them, and you can look at this with neuroticism. And neuroticism is a fascinating one. So neurotics tend to be very worried, very anxious about what's going to happen in the future. And I'm quite, as I said, I scored quite highly on neuroticism. And so back in the start of this year, I heard about this virus, this coronavirus in China. And I have a background in biomedical science, and I was looking, okay, the R naught's very high, and yes, it's all ACE2 receptors, oh wow, if it binds to them, that's really bad. All these things I was familiar with from my background in biomedical science. And so alarm bells went on right away. And the alarm bells go off because that high neuroticism, I'm sensitive to danger. I can see there's danger to that. And so I reacted by, okay, what might I need? Now, I probably won't need water, but I might need food. So I stocked up on some food, and I thought there might be some economic problems. So I thought, well, how can I diversify my assets to deal with economic problems? And I took care of all those things, and I got masks in January as well, and I looked into it, and I even got some hydroxychloroquine in February before people even officially were told that it was a problem. And so even though I'm a highly neurotic person, you can actually see, and even though the crisis with coronavirus hasn't quite been as bad as it looked initially, but you can see that if it had been a lot worse, my neuroticism set me up to handle it a lot better. And when lockdown finally happened, I was really calm because I did all my worry back in January and February. In fact, funnily enough, I kind of went into self-imposed lockdown before the real one started, and I ate through a lot of my supplies that I bought in January, and so in March I had to buy more supplies again. But yeah, my neuroticism meant that I worried first, and then I could relax later. And that's what we see with people with neurotics. They tend to be hoarders, they tend to be preppers, they tend to always have a plan B in the wings in case something goes wrong. And these people do very well in a crisis when something unexpected happens. Whereas people who are low neuroticism, they don't tend to do well in a crisis because they're not prepared, they don't have a second plan, and they don't have stockpiles or anything like that because they don't hoard and they don't prep. And they don't tend to do well. However, when there's no crisis, when things are steady, predictable, and little danger going on in the environment, the people with low neuroticism do a lot better. Because they are focusing on, well, how can I grow the situation? How can I expand? And then they're bigger risk takers. So they're taking risks to try and expand their assets and so on. And they do quite well, but only in the summer months. They're kind of like grasshoppers. If you know Grasshopper and the Ant fable, Aesop's fable. And they tend to actually get a lot of the chicks because there's that perception that neurotic men are somehow weak, and so women tend to prefer the men who are low neuroticism. And so when things are going really well, you see a decline in the neuroticism, at least in the male population. And as soon as a crisis comes along, and that crisis might come along because you don't have enough neurotic people, because neurotic people are always anticipating problems before they happen. And if you don't have enough neurotic people, you aren't anticipating enough problems that are going to come up in the future. And so in a funny way, the reduction in the number of neurotic men, because women just are choosing men who are low neuroticism, is going to cause a crisis. Because you've got all these men who are taking big risks that might lead to economic collapse or a virus escaping from a lab. Yep, I'll go there. And these risk takers who are living by the seat of their pants and attracting all the women, all the hot women, of course, they are endangering everyone else, creating a very crisis that will wipe themselves out and allow the neurotic men who have reduced in number to inherit the earth. And then the neurotic men set up a system with lots of fail-safes and checks and balances to make sure this doesn't happen again. But then, you know, they don't get laid, basically. And then the low neurotic risk-taking men rise, they ascend, you have this big mushrooming of your civilization because these men are go-getters and but they're built on the backs of the neurotic men who built a system that was stable enough for them to take those risks and be safe. And the whole cycle goes on. And I kind of look at, well, yeah, look, I'm a neurotic man, but I don't see that as a bad thing. I'm quite accepting of it. I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of the guy who's like, yeah, well, how do I make sure that I'm as strong as I can be? Because I'll be anxious. Am I strong enough? Am I prepared enough for that situation? And so I will make sure I do extra study, I'll do extra research, I'll do extra prep, and I'll take all these precautions to make sure that I do a better job and that I'm more prepared. Now, I don't take as many risks than other men, but at the same time, I'm like, well, I have my place. I have my place in the great story of life and civilization. And I'm clearly valuable, and the other men who are low neuroticism, or the other people in general who are low neuroticism, they're very valuable and they've got a part to play. And neither of us will ever completely, like, disappear. I mean, there's no they're right and I'm wrong, or I'm right and they're wrong. That it's not that simple. There's pros and cons to everything. And so, yeah, when I was told, oh, you sound very neurotic, I'm like, thanks. I think it's a compliment, but you mean it as an insult? Like, it's meaningless to me because I'm at peace with who I am. I accept who I am, and I see the value in who I am and what I bring. And it may not be the same as other people, but that's actually why it's so valuable, because it's not the same as what other people bring. I am different with different skills to bring to the party. And so, yeah, if you're one of those people who, like me, scored high neuroticism and you get told, oh, you sound neurotic, don't take it as being a bad thing. Just kind of look in the positives. There are positive sides to everything you might get. And all the other 4 personality types have got positives to them. Look for them. Look for the positive. Don't focus on the negative. That sounds ironic for a person high neuroticism to say, but it's true. I mean, and the funny thing is, you know, like, I scored really high on neuroticism, so I'm meant to be this really unstable person, but I think because I accept it, because I'm at peace with it, and I see the value in being the way that I am, and the value that I can provide to others, that I don't get the negative of it. Like, I can be really neurotic, but, like, still be calm and happy. Like, so, yeah, that's actually, yeah, that's kind of where I want to go. That's off the top of my head. No preparation for this one, so I guess I'm really challenging my own neuroticism here with this. There's some irony in this video. Anyway, I really hope you liked that, and I will come back with some more content in a few days' time as soon as I get a chance. But just want to make this video. If you liked it, please hit that like button, and there's a subscribe button there. That's really cool if you want to subscribe so you get more of my neurotic ramblings. And until next time, per spera ad astra.